I saw the glint of his scope through the dust-filled air of Mosul. In that fraction of a second, I knew with absolute certainty that someone had me in their crosshairs. I had maybe 2 seconds to live, maybe less. But to understand how I ended up in that moment, staring death in the face on a sun-baked Iraqi street, I need to take you back to the beginning of that day. It was June 14th, 2017. I remember the date because it was exactly 18 months since I'd first set boots on Iraqi soil. 18 months of patrols, checkpoints, firefights, and sleepless nights. I was Sergeant Marcus Chen, 24 years old, U.S. Army Infantry, and I'd reached that dangerous middle ground in a deployment, experienced enough to be confident, but not quite experienced enough to have seen everything that could go wrong. The morning started like so many others. I woke up at 05:30 in a tent that smelled like sweat, gun oil, and the particular brand of despair that comes from being 8,000 miles from home. The air conditioning had been broken for 3 days, and the temperature inside the tent was already approaching 90 degrees. I splashed lukewarm water on my face from a bottle, dressed in my combat uniform, and made my way to the chow hall for what passed as breakfast. Powdered eggs, toast that had the texture of cardboard, and coffee so bad it could strip paint. But that coffee was sacred. In a war zone, you learn to appreciate the small rituals that connect you to normalcy. I sat with Rodriguez, our squad automatic weapon gunner, a stocky guy from San Antonio who could make anybody laugh even in the worst situations. He was telling some elaborate story about his girlfriend back home, something about a wedding dress and her mother, but I wasn't really listening. I was watching Lieutenant Hayes across the room, hunched over a map with our company commander, and the way they kept glancing at our table told me we were going out today. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, we were in the briefing tent. 6 of us, Lieutenant Hayes, me as second in command, Rodriguez with his M249 SAW, Jenkins our sharpshooter, Martinez our grenadier, and Cooper our combat medic. Hayes spread a satellite map across a folding table that wobbled on the uneven ground. "Gentlemen, we've got a routine patrol through Al-Rifai district," Hayes began, tracing a route with his finger. "Intel says the area's been quiet for 2 weeks. We're going to show presence, check in with our local contacts, and be back before lunch." I studied the map carefully. Al-Rifai was a dense urban area, a maze of 3- and 4-story buildings with narrow streets and countless windows. The kind of place where every corner could hide a threat, where every rooftop was a potential sniper position. In 18 months, I'd learned that routine was a word that meant absolutely nothing in combat. "What's the threat assessment?" I asked. Hayes looked up from the map. "Low to moderate. There was some small arms fire in the area 3 days ago, but it was isolated. No IEDs reported in the past week. Civilian activity is normal, which is a good sign." Jenkins, who rarely spoke during briefings, cleared his throat. "What about elevated positions?" "Those buildings are perfect for snipers." "QRF is on standby if we need them," Hayes replied. Quick reaction force. Basically, if everything went to hell, they could be to us in under 10 minutes. That was supposed to be comforting, but 10 minutes is an eternity when bullets are flying. "We'll maintain standard patrol intervals, keep moving, don't present static targets. Chen, you'll be on the left flank. Rodriguez, right flank. Everyone else knows their positions." We spent another 15 minutes going over rally points, radio frequencies, and medevac procedures. It was all standard stuff, procedures we'd practiced hundreds of times. But Cooper, our medic, seemed more focused than usual. He was checking and rechecking his aid bag, making sure he had enough tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, pressure bandages. When you've been in combat long enough, you develop instincts about these things. Cooper's nervousness made me nervous. After the briefing, we had an hour to prep our gear. I went through my pre-mission ritual with the same attention to detail I'd learned in basic training. I checked my M4 carbine, chamber clear, magazine seated properly, optic clean and zeroed. I loaded 730-round magazines with good ammunition, not the old corroded rounds that sometimes showed up in supply. I checked my body armor, making sure the ceramic plates were properly seated. I filled my camelback with water and added electrolyte powder. Dehydration kills as surely as bullets in the Iraqi heat. I packed extra batteries for my radio, a compass as backup for my GPS, a tourniquet on each arm where I could reach it quickly. Rodriguez caught me doing press checks on my rifle for the third time. "Man, you're wound up tight today." "Just being thorough," I said, but he was right. Something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. No specific threat, no concrete reason for concern, just a feeling in my gut, the kind of primal instinct that our ancestors used to avoid predators on the savannah. In combat, you learn to listen to that instinct. We rolled out at 0900 hours in 2 Humvees. The plan was to drive to the edge of Al-Rifai, dismount, and patrol on foot through the district. Vehicle patrols were safer in some ways, armor protection, heavy weapons, mobility, but they also made you a target, and in narrow city streets, a disabled vehicle was a death trap. The drive took 20 minutes through streets that got progressively narrower and more crowded. Morning in Mosul was when the city came alive, shopkeepers opening their stalls, women in black abayas shopping for vegetables, old men sitting in plastic chairs drinking tea and smoking. Kids were everywhere, as they always are, running between cars, playing soccer with whatever they could find, begging for candy or bottled water. We dismounted 2 blocks from our patrol start point. The heat hit me like a physical force the moment I stepped out of the air-conditioned Humvee. It was already over 100 degrees and the sun was climbing toward its midday peak. The dust was thick in the air, a constant presence in Iraq, getting into your eyes, your nose, your mouth, the action of your weapon. You could taste it with every breath, a mixture of sand, exhaust fumes, and garbage that never quite went away. Hayes gave hand signals, and we fell into our patrol formation. He took point, moving with his rifle up, scanning constantly. I was 5 meters behind him on the left side of the street, my sector of responsibility the windows and rooftops on that side. Rodriguez mirrored me on the right with his SAW. Jenkins, Martinez, and Cooper followed in a staggered formation behind us. We'd done this so many times it was automatic, each person covering their sector, constantly moving, never presenting a static target for more than a few seconds. The streets of Al-Rifai were a sensory overload. Shop radios blaring Arabic music competed with car horns and the shouts of vendors. The smells shifted from block to block, fresh bread from a bakery, rotting garbage in an alley, diesel exhaust, the sharp smell of propane from cooking stoves. Every doorway was a potential threat. Every window could hide a rifle. Every parked car could be packed with explosives. Your eyes had to keep moving. Your brain had to process hundreds of inputs per second, separating normal from dangerous. The civilians were a good sign. When locals go about their normal business, it usually means there's no immediate threat. They have a sixth sense for danger. They've lived through years of war, and they know when to disappear. Women shopping, kids playing, tea shops full of customers. All of that meant the neighborhood felt safe. We covered 2 blocks without incident. Hayes checked in with our base over the radio, giving our position and status. Everything was going according to plan, which should have been reassuring, but somehow wasn't. My shirt was already soaked with sweat under my body armor. The weight of my gear, rifle, ammunition, water, body armor, helmet, was probably close to 70 pounds, and every step felt heavier in the oppressive heat. That's when I heard the first shot. It was distant, maybe 4 or 5 blocks to the north, the crack of a single rifle shot echoing off the concrete buildings. In Iraq, you learn to judge distance and direction by sound alone, and this one was far enough away that it wasn't an immediate threat. But it was close enough to matter. Hayes's fist shot up, the hand signal for halt. We all froze in place, weapons up, scanning our sectors. The civilians around us barely reacted. That was another good sign. If they'd scattered or hit the ground, it would have meant they knew something we didn't. We waited, counting seconds. In combat, time becomes elastic. Those 30 seconds felt like 10 minutes. Every nerve was on high alert, adrenaline sharpening your senses. I could hear my own breathing inside my helmet, feel my heart beating against my body armor, taste the dust and fear in my mouth. Hayes spoke quietly into his radio, checking with the other patrols in our area. Nobody had reported contact. It could have been anything. A negligent discharge, someone shooting at a dog, a warning shot, celebration fire. In Iraq, not every gunshot meant combat. Jenkins had taken a knee and was scanning rooftops through his ACOG scope, looking for threats we couldn't see with naked eyes. After what felt like forever, he gave a thumbs up, nothing visible. Hayes made the decision to continue. We started moving again, but the atmosphere had changed. The relaxed vigilance of a routine patrol had shifted into something sharper, more focused. Fingers moved from trigger guards to triggers. Spacing between soldiers increased slightly. If someone opened fire, we didn't want to be bunched up as targets. We advanced 2 more blocks. A soccer ball rolled past my boots, and I instinctively tracked it with my rifle before realizing it was just kids playing. One of them, maybe 7 years old, ran up to retrieve the ball and flashed me a gap-toothed smile. I smiled back reflexively, but my eyes never stopped scanning the windows above him. That's when I saw it. 3rd floor window, maybe 40 meters ahead. A reflection, brief but distinct. Too bright and focused to be ordinary glass catching sunlight, too steady to be accidental. In that instant, every bit of training, every briefing, every close call from the past 18 months crystallized into a single word in my mind. Scope. The words were already leaving my mouth. Contact! Sniper, 3 o'clock high. When the world exploded into chaos, the first shot came before I finished the sentence, and I learned something in that moment that no amount of training can really prepare you for: the difference between knowing you might die and knowing you're about to die. The supersonic crack of the bullet passing close enough to feel the pressure wave, the simultaneous impact as the round hit the wall behind me, the spray of concrete dust, and the realization that my head had been right there a tenth of a second ago. Training took over. I was diving before my conscious mind registered the threat, trying to get to cover, trying to make myself a harder target. But I made a catastrophic mistake in that split-second decision. With adrenaline flooding my system and my brain screaming at me to move now, I dove right instead of left. Left would have taken me to a concrete barrier, solid cover 5 meters away. Right took me into the middle of the street, onto open pavement with the nearest cover 20 meters distant. I hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs, my rifle clattering on the pavement beneath me. And in that terrible moment of clarity, sprawled out in the open with nowhere to hide, I realized I'd just made the last mistake of my life. The squad was scattering. I could hear Rodriguez screaming into his radio, calling out the sniper's position. Jenkins was returning fire, his M4 cracking in controlled bursts, but I knew he didn't have the angle. The sniper was protected by the window frame, and Jenkins was shooting blind, just trying to make the sniper keep his head down. Martinez was dragging 2 civilians behind a vendor stall, getting them out of the line of fire. Hayes was shouting something, but the words were lost in the sudden chaos of combat. The second shot came. The pavement exploded 6 inches from my face, and I felt the sting of concrete fragments tearing into my left cheek. I tasted blood and dust, felt the warm trickle running down toward my jaw. My ears were ringing from the impact. But I was still alive, and my brain was processing a terrifying realization. The sniper had me dead to rights. I was completely exposed, lying flat in the middle of the street. He should have killed me with that second shot. The fact that he missed meant one of 2 things. Either he was a terrible shot, which seemed unlikely given that he'd gotten into position and was engaging U.S. soldiers, or he was playing with me. Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos. "Chen, stay down! We're coming to get you!" My voice sounded strange in my own ears, high-pitched with fear. "Negative! Too exposed! I need smoke!" But even as I said it, I knew smoke wouldn't save me. It takes 3 seconds to deploy a smoke grenade, another 4 or 5 for the smoke to build up enough to provide concealment. The sniper could put half a dozen rounds into me in that time, and smoke only provides concealment, not cover. The bullets would still come through. I was on my stomach, spread-eagled on the burning asphalt, trying to make myself as flat as possible. My rifle was pinned beneath me, useless. My body armor might stop a rifle round to the chest, but it wouldn't help if he shot me in the head, which, from his elevated position, was an easy shot. The sun beat down on my back, and I could feel sweat running down my spine, soaking into my uniform. My heart was hammering so hard, I thought my ribs might crack. Every breath tasted like copper and dust. This is how I die, I thought. 24 years old, in the middle of a street in Mosul, Iraq. Killed by a sniper I never even saw. My mom's face flashed in my mind. Her smile when I graduated from basic training at Fort Benning, her tears at the airport when I deployed, my little sister who looked up to me, my dad who'd served in Desert Storm and told me to keep my head down. I thought about Rodriguez's stupid jokes, about Jenkins' quiet competence, about all the things I'd never get to do. Then Hayes's voice cut through the fog of fear, sharp and urgent. "Chen, listen to me. 3rd floor window. He's firing every 7 seconds. Count it. Move between shots. 7 seconds." That single piece of information cut through my panic like a knife. My brain, desperate for something concrete to focus on, latched onto it. 7 seconds between shots. Why 7 seconds? And then I understood. The sniper wasn't using a semi-automatic rifle. He was using a bolt action, probably a Dragunov SVD, or maybe an old Mosin Nagant. Every shot required him to work the bolt, eject the spent casing, chamber a new round, reacquire his target through the scope, control his breathing, and squeeze the trigger. That took time. 7 seconds was actually fast for a bolt-action rifle at that distance. The 3rd shot came, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized I'd been counting without knowing it. 7 seconds had passed. The round hit the pavement where my head had been, but I'd shifted it 6 inches to the left during second 5, a tiny movement that saved my life. That's when the fear transformed into something else. Not courage. I was still terrified. But training began to override panic. 20 weeks of basic and infantry training, countless hours on the range, all the muscle memory and drilled responses that the Army had beaten into me started to surface. My Sergeant Major's voice from Fort Benning echoed in my head. "A stationary target is a dead target. Keep moving. Always keep moving." 4th shot. This time, I'd shifted my entire body 18 inches to the right during his reload cycle. The bullet sparked off the pavement behind me, sending up another spray of concrete fragments. I could hear it now, the rhythm of his shots, the pattern. And I could hear something else too. The time between shots was getting shorter. 6 seconds, then 5. He was rushing, getting frustrated, making mistakes. Jenkins's suppressing fire was working, forcing the sniper to shoot faster, denying him the time to aim carefully. Martinez had his M203 grenade launcher out. I heard him shout, "Frag out!" and watched the 40mm grenade arc through the air in a perfect parabola. It punched through the 3rd floor window and detonated with a muffled crump. The explosion wasn't huge. A 40mm grenade has about the explosive power of a hand grenade. But in an enclosed room, it would be devastating. In that half-second window, when the sniper was flinching from the blast, when his attention was broken, I made my move. Every instinct screamed at me to roll toward the concrete barrier on my left. It was closer. It was obvious cover. It was where any rational person would go. But I thought about the sniper's pattern, about his psychology. He was frustrated, he was rushing, and he would anticipate the obvious move. He'd lead his shot toward that barrier, putting his bullet where he expected me to be. So I went right, toward a burned-out car chassis 10 meters to the east. Farther away, worse cover, but unexpected. I rolled, pumping my legs, keeping as low as possible. Every muscle in my body screamed. Time dilated again, and I swear I could feel the heat of the 5th shot as it passed over me, hitting exactly where the barrier was, exactly where he'd expected me to go. I crashed behind the car in a tangle of limbs and gear. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip my rifle. I could taste blood from where I'd bitten my tongue. My legs felt like water. Rodriguez was beside me a second later, his massive frame blocking me from the window, and I've never been so happy to see another human being in my life. "You good? You hit?" His hands were already checking me for wounds, professional and efficient despite the chaos. No, I'm..." I had to stop and swallow hard against the bile rising in my throat. I'm good. The street went quiet. No more shots. Jenkins was still covering the window, but there was no movement visible. Hayes was already on the radio. Outlaw 6, this is Outlaw 2 actual. We had contact, single sniper, third floor structure, grid coordinates to follow. Possible enemy, KIA from 40mm HE round. Requesting QRF to clear the building and confirm. The quick reaction force arrived 9 minutes later. 4 Humvees and 16 soldiers who stormed the building with the kind of overwhelming force that left no room for mistakes. Cooper checked my face while we waited, using tweezers to pull concrete fragments from my cheek and applying antibiotic ointment. The cuts were superficial, nothing that would even leave scars, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. When the QRF team leader came back down, his face was grim. You got him. One enemy killed in action, Chinese-made SVD Dragunov. Kid couldn't have been more than 19 years old. A year younger than my little sister. Someone's son, maybe someone's brother. He'd tried to kill me, had come within inches of succeeding, but I felt no satisfaction in his death. Just exhaustion and a sick sort of emptiness. We sat in the shade of an overturned truck while Cooper finished patching me up. Rodriguez handed me a water bottle, and I realized my mouth was so dry I could barely swallow. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made my limbs feel like lead. Jenkins sat down next to me, his rifle across his knees. That was good thinking, Chen, counting his pattern. That's what saved you. But I knew it wasn't just thinking. It was luck stacked on top of training stacked on top of more luck. If Martinez hadn't had that grenade ready, if the sniper had been using a semi-automatic rifle instead of bolt action, if I'd rolled left toward the obvious cover, if Jenkins hadn't kept him suppressed with return fire, if Cooper hadn't dragged those civilians out of the line of fire, giving Martinez the clear shot with his grenade launcher, if Rodriguez hadn't been screaming coordinates into the radio, bringing the QRF as fast as humanly possible. 1,000 variables, any one of which could have gone differently. The margin between life and death had been measured in inches and fractions of seconds. Hayes clapped my shoulder, his face serious. You did good out there, but we've got to finish the patrol. Can you continue, or do you need to head back? That was the question, wasn't it? Part of me wanted nothing more than to get in a Humvee and head back to base, to sit in my tent and process what had just happened. But the other part, the part that had been trained and drilled and molded by the Army, knew that if I stopped now, the fear would win. If I went back without finishing the mission, every patrol after this would be harder. I'm good to continue, sir. We finished the patrol. We checked in with our local contacts. We showed presence in the neighborhood. We did everything we'd set out to do. My legs felt weak the entire time, and I jumped at every shadow, but I stayed in formation and did my job. That's what you do. You don't stop because someone almost killed you. You finish the mission. You trust your training. You rely on your squad. And then, when it's finally over and you're back at base, you allow yourself to fall apart a little bit. That night, I lay in my tent and couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that glint from the window. Every sound made me reach for my rifle. Cooper came by to check on me, professional and kind, and told me that nightmares were normal, that the fear was normal, that what I was feeling was just my brain processing trauma. You gonna be okay, Chen? Yeah, I said, and I almost believed it. Yeah, I'll be okay. That was 8 years ago. I'm 32 now. I finished my deployment, another 6 months after that day in Al-Rifai. I came home, got out of the Army, and tried to build a normal life. I work construction in Seattle now. I have a wife and a 3-year-old daughter who knows her daddy used to be a soldier, but doesn't really understand what that means. I sleep better than I used to, though I still have nights when I wake up reaching for a rifle that isn't there. I still see that glint sometimes, in random reflections, sunlight off a car window, light bouncing off someone's glasses. My heart rate spikes for just a second before my rational brain catches up and reminds me that I'm safe, that I'm home, that the war is behind me. I still count to 7 without meaning to. 7 seconds. The rhythm of life and death. People ask me sometimes how I survived that day. They want a story about superhuman courage or combat instincts or some kind of heroic action. The truth is simpler and scarier than that. I survived because I remembered a piece of training in the 2 seconds before panic could completely take over. I survived because Lieutenant Hayes was calm under fire and gave me the information I needed. I survived because Martinez had a grenade launcher and the skill to use it. I survived because Jenkins kept laying down suppressing fire even though he couldn't see his target. I survived because Rodriguez and Cooper had my back. I survived because a 19-year-old sniper was using a bolt-action rifle instead of a semi-automatic. I survived because I rolled right instead of left. I survived because of 100 tiny variables, each one of which could have been different. I survived because I got lucky. 6 weeks after that patrol, Rodriguez was killed by an improvised explosive device. He was riding in a Humvee that hit a buried artillery shell on a road we'd traveled dozens of times before. He died instantly, along with 2 other soldiers. Cooper lost his right leg below the knee to a mortar attack in Ramadi. He's back in Texas now, working as a physician's assistant, and he says the prosthetic leg is actually pretty good, but I know he has phantom pain that wakes him up at night. Jenkins made it home physically intact, but 2 years after his discharge, he ate his service pistol in his apartment in Colorado. He left a note that said he couldn't outrun the memories anymore. I didn't find out until 3 months after the funeral. So when people thank me for my service, I think about them. Rodriguez with his terrible jokes and his infectious laugh. Cooper dragging wounded soldiers to safety even after he'd been hit himself. Jenkins, quiet and competent, who could thread a bullet through a window from 200 meters away but couldn't find a way to live with what he'd seen. They're the real story, not how I survived one sniper on one day in Mosul, but how many good soldiers didn't make it home, or came home broken in ways that never quite heal. The lesson I learned that day wasn't about courage or combat tactics, though both of those things mattered. The lesson was about the randomness of survival in war, about how the margin between going home and not going home can be measured in inches and seconds, about how routine is a meaningless word when someone is trying to kill you, about how training and luck and the skill of the people beside you are all equally important, and you can't control which one will save your life. I learned that fear is normal and natural, and the goal isn't to eliminate it, but to function despite it. I learned that your body will want to freeze when death is close, and training is what allows you to move anyway. I learned that the person trying to kill you is probably scared too, probably young too, probably has a family somewhere who loves them. I learned that the glint of a scope in a third-floor window can change your entire life in the space between one heartbeat and the next. If you're in the military, or thinking about joining, here's what I want you to know. Train like your life depends on it, because someday it might. Learn your job inside and out. Practice until the movements are automatic, until you can do them while your brain is screaming in panic. Listen to that instinct in your gut when something feels wrong. Trust your squad. Your life is in their hands, and theirs is in yours. Stay alert. Keep moving. Count the seconds. Remember that routine means nothing in a combat zone. And if you ever see a glint from a third-floor window, don't think. Just move. Movement might buy you the 2 seconds you need. Hesitation won't. That's the difference. That's how I'm still alive.